cover story. We have with us Hussain Haqqani. He's the former Pakistan ambassador to the United States and Sri Lanka, but also he's someone who doesn't hesitate to speak his mind, which is why he's often been called Pakistan's leading dissident public intellectual. He's also authored several books, and today we are here to discuss his latest book, Reimagining Pakistan, Transforming a Dysfunctional Nuclear State. Welcome to NewsX.
Pleasure being here.
Pleasure to have you here. And at the crux of this, let's begin with the premises of this latest book that you've written. You, of course, argued that the whole trouble of Pakistan is that you need to shift from ideological nationalism to functional nationalism. Can you explain that a bit for us?
Most nations become nations because they have been nations for centuries. It's an evolutionary process. Shared language, shared history, shared geography makes people think of themselves as a nation. Most social scientists agree that nation is essentially a function of the imagination. Not every Indian knows each other. So it's not like a community where you live together and therefore you know each other. It's because every Indian thinks they are an Indian. That's what makes them Indian.
Okay.
So in case of Pakistan, Pakistan did not evolve over centuries. Pakistan was created as a result of arguments that were offered in the twilight years of the British Raj in the subcontinent. And at that time, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the founder of Pakistan, came forward with the notion that the Muslims of the subcontinent and the Hindus of the subcontinent, because of their different historic experiences, were two nations. And that the Muslims should get a national homeland in the areas where they were a majority. The whole idea was debated even then. Some people pointed out that 1/3 of the Muslim population of India was dispersed and therefore will not be part of Pakistan ever. Secondly, it was going to be a new country, so it was going to have many, many difficulties. To cut the long story short, Pakistan came about in 1947, and when it came about with two wings. One was East Pakistan, which is today Bangladesh, and then West Pakistan. Pakistan is a nation of only 70 years of history. What has happened in these 70 years is that Pakistan has actually invented a history for itself. Instead of acknowledging that we are something that came out only in the twilight years of the British Empire and we are only 70 years old, and maybe the idea is 77 years old, what Pakistani children are taught is that the idea of Pakistan was born the day the first Muslim conqueror set foot in the subcontinent. What that has done is it has created a bond between religion, religious identity and the country. Secondly, because Pakistan inherited a much larger army than it inherited resources. Pakistan got 17% of India's resources and 33% of British India's army. It has also become a militarist state. What I am advocating is that instead of waiting for circumstances to force a change in Pakistan's situation, like it happened in the creation of Bangladesh, where Pakistan's eastern wing sort of broke away by circumstances that nobody had planned for, why don't we start planning and thinking that the 200 million people who live in the country called Pakistan now and have lived in it for the last 70 years, that they should have a new basis for why they are a country, and that basis should be democratic, it should be federal, it should be secular, and it should be about the prosperity of the people rather than the glory of some abstract ideology.
In fact, you do argue to change the course of Pakistan, we need to also change the discourse. That's one of the
that's one of the lines I think.
And also you made a very good point. You say that Jinnah never intended Pakistan to be an Islamic state. He was more looking for the relationship between India and Pakistan to be like US and Canada. That's what
Mr. Jinnah was very clear about that.
That's an interesting line of thought.
One of the most important things is that today, whether it's a young Indian or a young Pakistani, neither would find it easy to understand that in the entire debate about Pakistan's creation, no one ever talked about permanent hostility between India and Pakistan. That was a function of after the fact.
Correct.
At that time, in fact, there were many ironies which I have recorded in my book. For example, Pakistan's first High Commissioner, the person who was designated to be High Commissioner of Pakistan to India, was somebody from Uttar Pradesh, what was then the United Provinces, a Muslim from there. And he was asked to become the High Commissioner, and he picked up his bags from wherever he was in Lucknow or wherever and moved to Delhi to be the High Commissioner. Question arose that if he was Pakistan's High Commissioner, A, had he been to Pakistan And B, does he have Pakistani citizenship? And if he has Pakistani citizenship, he might have to give up his property in India, because at that time a property swap was being done. He turned around and said, no, 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 I'm an Indian citizen, but I'm Pakistan's ambassador here, which of course was an implausible argument. Similarly, Mr. Jinnah asked the Indian High Commissioner to Pakistan to convey to Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru that his house on Malabar Hill in Mumbai should be kept intact, so that after he retires as Governor General of Pakistan, he can come back and live in Mumbai. Now, that shows that whatever was happening, and I point out, I record all the historic facts of how there was a lot of confusion in that whole process. I point out that basically whatever the confusion, one of the things nobody had thought through was that these two countries are going to be permanently hostile. And by creating that permanent hostility, going to war 4 times, continuing to send terrorists across the border and across the line of control, Pakistan has done a disservice not only to India, but also to itself. Because we have ended up becoming a nation of militants and militarists instead of becoming a nation that pays attention to its human capital development and to its economic progress.
And that is part of your policy shift that you've been talking about also. But you mentioned a very interesting statistic about how Pakistan got 17% of the resources, but a much larger percent of the army. And then you write that in other countries, armies are built to counter threat, but here threat is enhanced to satisfy the army, keep the army occupied. That seems to be the crux of really the whole idea of keeping the hatred of India alive. Actually,
that is one of the biggest and the saddest things that happened at the time of partition. Because of this, and it was not just the fact that Pakistan got a large army, it was also the fact that the Muslim League, which was the political party that had led Pakistan to its creation, had done no homework. So for example, the capital of Pakistan was undetermined until 2 months before independence. And then it was decided that it's going to be the city of Karachi, which was Mr. Jinnah's place of birth. Except that Karachi was at that time, now it's a megapolis, but at that time it was a relatively smaller city, provincial capital of the province of Sindh, which had been a province only for a few years.
Right.
So it did not have the infrastructure to be the capital of a large country. That created problems. Pakistan had very few civil servants because there were very few Muslim officers in what was known as the Indian civil service, Muslim officers who were willing to serve in Pakistan. There were some who wanted to stay on in India, and those that were willing to serve did not belong to the areas that constituted Pakistan. So all of a sudden, Pakistan had administrators who were either British, so independence didn't mean much because you still have, Sir Douglas Gracie running the army rather than Muhammad Ahmad or whatever. And then the second part of it was that there were locals who belonged to, somebody was from Indore, somebody was from Mumbai, somebody was from Pune, and they were all of a sudden in a country where they had never been. And the only institution that had the infrastructure and that did not move in a significant way was the army, because the British Indian Army's northern command was located in Rawalpindi. So all they had to do was change the signboard outside saying, which used Pakistan to say Northern Command. Instead of Northern Command, it became General Headquarters of the Pakistan Army. So they already had an infrastructure, they already had telephones, they already had offices, they already had vehicles, and they already had men who could be deployed. That empowered the army far more than any political party or any civilian institution, including the civil service.
So that explains the supremacy of the army. Now let us talk about how it is, ironically, as you pointed out, also it's a lot of the army generals who use Islam as a unifier to unify the nation rather than anything else. So it's using religion for their own ends.
Well, for one thing, of course, the first generation of Pakistan's military officers were all British trained. In fact, there were a lot of British officers who stayed on. Pakistan Army was headed by a Britisher until 1951. Pakistan Air Force was headed by a Britisher until 1957. Navy similarly till about 1956. So for many years, the British officers continued. And in a real twist of irony, considering what is happening with the ISI these days, the ISI, when it was founded, for the first 11 years, its longest serving chief was an Australian who served in the British Army. who ended up being this institution that is now portrayed as this great defender of Islam was headed by a Christian from Australia, Major General Cawthorne, who institutionalized it. The result of all that was that the people and the elite were totally disconnected. Even in 1946, when the elections were held, that the Muslim League won and therefore demanded that Pakistan be created, the Muslim League had won more votes from the areas that were going to be left behind in India, not in the areas that were going to be part of Pakistan. Okay. So, for example, Pakistan's Pashtun areas, the great leader was Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, the frontier Gandhi. He won the election, not the Muslim League. And similarly in Sindh, a very small majority was acquired by the Muslim League. So all of a sudden, there was a need to try and build a connection between the people and those who ruled them.
Right.
And what could be better than the religion, religion card? And the religion card was played, and it was played with a vengeance. And then once the hostilities started with India, and Kashmir became an issue, the religion card became intertwined with three factors. So Pakistani national identity has been, we are Pakistani because we are Muslim. We are Pakistani because we are in an antagonistic relationship with India. And we are Pakistani because we deserved Kashmir but we didn't get it. Okay. And that is what has been percolating for 70 years. My argument as somebody who was born after partition, and very frankly, if my parents hadn't moved from what is today India to what is today Pakistan, I would not have been a Pakistani because I wouldn't have been born there. But I'm a born Pakistani. Nobody can take that away from me.
Correct.
So I'm saying that 95% of Pakistan's population today are people who were born as Pakistanis. So I can understand those who were born as Indians and overnight became Pakistanis, that they needed to figure out why are we Pakistani.
Yeah.
But I don't need to figure that out. I was born Pakistani. So all I need to do is figure out how to run Pakistan.
Yeah.
Why keep that ideology alive? And I think that all evidence points to the fact that what will make Pakistan run better are a few things. Focus on economics, invest in your people. Pakistan still has 40% illiteracy, which is not acceptable in this day and age. Focus on higher education. It is sad that a greater percentage of young people who finish secondary school in Nepal end up in university than a similar figure for Pakistan. Right. Fewer Pakistani young people who finish high school end up in university. Quality of education is not particularly high either. Pakistan is the 6th largest country by population in the world, 6th largest army in the world, 6th largest nuclear arsenal, but then 42nd largest economy by on nominal basis, 26th on PPP basis. Those statistics basically show that there is a disequilibrium, and that disequilibrium will someday make it difficult even to sustain this particular identity that has been built, because religion and antipathy towards someone else is not going to change the realities at home.
Correct.
So my argument is, let us focus on that and change the realities at home instead of trying to force an ideology that is not rooted in a realistic process of accomplishment for the country.
But you do know where I'm coming from when I ask about the dangers of hyper-nationalism and using religion as a unifier. Do you see overtones of that in India nowadays?
So look, I'm your guest in India, and
a very welcome guest.
And as a guest,
judging by all the reviews to this book, can I say?
And as a guest, I should not be saying anything that is critical of my host country. But what I would say is that Pakistan is a cautionary tale for everyone in the world. Be careful of what you start, because it can have consequences that may not necessarily be what you had envisaged. So, for example, in 1947, Pakistan's elite were all Western educated people.
Right.
None of them were religious fanatics. But once they started talking about religion in politics, slowly our more conservative and even orthodox and fanatical elements started asserting themselves.
Correct.
And now, of course, Hafiz Saeed is a greater hero for some in Pakistan than even Muhammad Ali Jinnah. People say, you know, Muhammad Ali Jinnah was not religious enough. Hafiz Saeed is more, and Hafiz Saeed is a man who is recognized as a global terrorist by the rest of the world.
Yes.
That makes Pakistan out of sync with the rest of the world. So my point is that Pakistan's experience should educate everyone, Indians, others, that this unleashing of religious passions as a way of building national identity ends up in a very unhealthy manner. Diversity is a strength for a nation. When people are actually willing to work together, irrespective of what their religion and what their language is.
Exactly.
And when you look at an Indian banknote and you see something like 20+ languages on it, actually it's a sign of strength. Because Pakistan has tried to impose one language. Pakistan in 1947 decided Urdu will be the national language.
Which didn't go down well in the northwest frontier.
Well, it didn't go down well in Bengal. And the East Pakistanis were the first to protest. And they said, why are we being forced to accept one language? Out of that was born the idea of two national languages, Bengali and Urdu. But then the Sindhis said, what about our language? And the Pashtuns said, what about ours? And then the Baluch. So you end up having a situation much better to say all languages are equal. However, practically, people will start using, for example, even today, and I'm just traveling, I traveled in India South, everybody spoke to me in Hindi. I mean, it was a different kind of, different Hindi than you and I are used to up here. But they spoke it, but that is because you didn't try to formally and officially impose it. If you imposed it...
Oh, it has been tried.
Yeah, it has been tried and it didn't succeed. But my point is voluntary acceptance. Look, religion is important. It's an important element of everybody's life and culture. But any attempt to try and impose it will be divisive because everybody's understanding of religion will be different. So what happened in Pakistan was, first we started off by saying, well, Hindu, Muslim, two separate, we are separate, then we get a Muslim country. Then within the Muslim country, the issue starts, which kind of Islam are we going to have? Is it going to be Sunni Islam? Is it going to be Shia Islam? Is it going to be a more modern interpretation of Islam? Is it going to be a more conservative interpretation of Islam? Is it going to be Sufi Islam? Is it going to be Orthodox Islam? And we have had those debates and we are continuing to have them. And, you know, I come to India and I can go to a mosque and a mosque here is not guarded by the military. In Pakistan, some mosques have to be guarded by the military because of mutual sectarian attacks. That is not something that is desirable. Ireland is another place. The Protestants and the Catholics, after fighting for many years, finally they reached the conclusion, who cares who's a Catholic, who's a Protestant, let's get on with our life.
Exactly.
At the end of the day, GDP, growth, progress, being relevant in the modern world is what the collective process should be about. And religion should be about individual conduct. People should be more pious in their personal conduct as people of religion.
Okay, on that note, we're going to take a short break, but also before the break, I'd like to remind you that Mr. Haqqani has also been the advisor to 3 former Pakistan Prime Ministers, including Benazir Bhutto and Nawaz Sharif. And one of them has been assassinated and one has just been debarred from fighting elections. So I'm going to talk to you about your sense of job security after this. Stay with us. Welcome back to Cover Story. We are in conversation with Hussain Haqqani. Before the break, I asked, you've known how to speak your mind without, the consequences. As a result, you've also been kidnapped, you've been held in captivity, your stint as ambassador was cut short. A little bit about your own life. That's more fascinating, I think.
Well, my life is actually, I don't think it's fascinating, but, I've lived it.
The captivity must have been at least...
There's one of the great Urdu poets said, "Guzre hue zamane ka ab taskara hi kya, acha guzar gaya, bahut acha guzar gaya." Let me just say that I started my life like any migrant child in Pakistan, because my parents had migrated from here and we were all Mahajirs in Karachi. And at that time, religious groups had a strong presence in Karachi, so I was attracted to that. I was part of the student movement of the Jamaat-e-Islami, which was known as the Islami Jamiat Talaba. Realized very early on as a young man that, you know, this wasn't for me. Became a journalist, worked out of Hong Kong for a few years, came back to Pakistan, worked with Mr. Nawaz Sharif initially when Pakistan made the transition from General Ziaul-Haq's military dictatorship to civilian rule. And then there was no going back. I got into the whole political maelstrom of Pakistan and ended up working with Benazir Bhutto. What I have done in my life, I think, is always think about what's happening and review my own views. I have never been somebody who thinks consistency is a great virtue. I think self-evaluation is a greater virtue. So you keep thinking. And during that process, I've also thought about my views on politics. I've seen politics at close quarters. I've seen the weaknesses of Pakistan's civilian leaders. I've seen the manipulation of the military, of the political process. And so the conclusions I have reached that are in my books are conclusions that are the result of both research and personal observation. As far as this fear of paying a personal price is concerned, the way I look at it is the price I have paid is very small. 3 months in detention or in prison, 1 kidnapping by the intelligence services, you know, I survived that, thank God. Well, it was scary at that time.
Tell us a bit about that, what happened?
Well, you know, I was wrapped in a blanket, stuck in the back of a car. Mr. Nawaz Sharif was Prime Minister at that time, 1999. This is just around the time of Kargil. So I got all the news of Kargil in captivity. The first 3, 4, 5 days, they intimidated me and tried to pretend that, you know, they weren't officials, but I knew that they were. I was wrapped, sort of, you know, my face was covered, etc. All that time while they tried to interrogate me and ask me various things of whether I was a foreign agent of some sort or not. And then eventually, because there was so much noise outside about it, they said, oh, we found him somewhere, and he's being handed over to the Federal Investigation Agency for investigations into Benazir Bhutto's corruption. That investigation ended just recently, by the way, and they found nothing because it was not an investigation for corruption. It was just a fabricated charge. Second time I was in trouble was when I resigned as ambassador, or was forced to resign as ambassador in the United States. Then too, you know, there were a lot of threats. Since then, I've decided that one thing that I learned from that was that given the choice between getting killed, going to prison, and living in exile, pick living in exile. And so I've done that.
So wise choice.
That gives me the chance to write books and contribute to the debate on ideas. One of the things, let me leave it with you, one of the things where I feel Pakistan is lagging is also the generation of ideas. Pakistan is a nation of more than 200 million people. Pakistan should certainly be publishing, Pakistanis should be writing and publishing certainly more books than the people of Greece, who are only 12 million. And yet, every year, more books are written and published in Greece than they are written in Pakistan.
I think they had the first mover advantage, what with all the philosophers.
Well, but my point is that they may have had a first mover advantage, but the second mover at some point has to kind of catch up. And now there are 193 movers. Pakistan should be somewhere in the top 20 or 30 or 40 or 50. It shouldn't be where it is. So I want to be one of those who ends up writing a few books for Pakistanis and the next generation of Pakistanis to think about these things. My book, Pakistan Between Mosque and Military, for the first time exposed the close relationship of Pakistan's jihadi groups and the military. And then my next book, Magnificent Delusions, was about US-Pakistan relations and has been treated as a significant sort of, you know, text influencing American policy. Third one was India versus Pakistan. Why can't we just be friends? Which actually points out what mistakes have been made in this relationship on the Indian side, but more on the Pakistani side. So I think that's a better calling for me right now with all my experience. And I think I can make a greater contribution to increased awareness within Pakistan of the troubled course that we have adopted as a nation and how we might actually at least try and change it.
Well, it's been very interesting to talk to one of the movers who I think is on his way to make a movement that counts. Thank you so much for talking to us.
Such a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you. And thank you for watching this show. We'll see you again same time next week.